18 years ago, her 3-year-old daughter vanished from a daycare without a trace, leaving Elise Monroe in a silence no passing year could mend. Now 46, she's learned to survive it, to carry grief like a hidden scar, silent and permanent. Then, one quiet afternoon in the corner of a small town library, she flips through a fashion magazine and stops cold. On the cover, a young woman standing beneath orchard light, her face calm, her eye marked by a deep indigo teardrop. Elise's breath catches. That shape, that gaze. Could it be? Could her daughter, Ava, still be alive? The scent of old paper and worn leather bindings drifted through the quiet air of the Asheville Public Library, a space where silence had become not just a rule, but a comfort. Elise Monroe moved steadily along the aisles, sliding books back into their shelves with a kind of efficiency born from habit. At 46, her hands still moved with the same grace they had 20 years ago when she first took this job, not for the pay, not even for the love of books, but because libraries offered something else: predictability, safety, a sanctuary against the chaos that had once torn her life apart. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early October, the kind of gray-skied day that made the light through the stained glass windows of the library diffuse like watercolor. She wore her usual gray cardigan, sensible flats, her shoulder-length chestnut hair pulled into a loose twist. The only change, perhaps, was the silver threading through her hair, more prominent now, not hidden anymore. Time had left its mark. She was halfway through reshelving the literature section when the cart wheel squeaked sharply, breaking the quiet. Elise looked up instinctively, and there it was. On the front counter lay a stack of new deliveries, including the periodicals, magazines. She didn't usually pay them much mind. Most of them were fashion glossies or travel journals that served more as coffee table ornaments than sources of insight. But one caught her eye. Or, more accurately, someone on the cover did. She took a few hesitant steps toward the stack, wiping her hands instinctively on her skirt. At the top lay an issue of Vogue Americana, and on it, a young woman no older than 21 stood in front of a weathered farmhouse, dressed in a loose red blouse and denim overalls. Her expression was calm, introspective. But what rooted Elise to the floor was the birthmark. Just beneath the girl's right eye was a distinct teardrop-shaped mark, a swirl of deep indigo with faint violet undertones. Elise's breath caught in her chest. That color, that shape, it couldn't be. Her mind reeled. For a moment, the air seemed thinner, her balance unsure. She gripped the edge of the counter, her eyes locked on the image as if it might vanish if she blinked. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the magazine, flipping past advertisements and spreads until she found the article, A New Americana, Faces of the Land. It was a feature on rural youth helping revive farming in Appalachia. The girl's name was listed simply as Aria Wells, 21 Keller Farm. Elise stared at the name. It meant nothing. But that mark was everything. 18 years ago, her daughter Ava had been taken from a daycare. Elise had stepped away for only a few hours to cover a shift at the library. She'd left her phone in her purse, buried beneath papers. By the time she saw the missed calls, 7 in total, Ava was gone. The daycare had claimed a staff member, Margot Pledger, had walked Ava out during recess. Security footage confirmed it. Margot led Ava gently by the hand out through the gate, and then she vanished. 2 weeks later, Margot's body was found hanging from a tree in Pisgah Forest. The police ruled it a suicide. Overwhelmed by guilt, they said. Elise had never believed that. Margot had seemed calm, calculated, almost too intentional. And Ava? No trace, no leads. Just that one detail, the birthmark. A small indigo teardrop nestled beneath her right eye like a permanent bruise. So unusual. The doctors had called it a dermal melanocytosis with violet undertones. To Elise, it had always looked like her daughter had once cried a tear of ink, and that tear had decided to stay. For years, that mark had haunted her. It was in every flyer, every digital reconstruction, every social media plea Elise had ever posted. People sent in tips from time to time. False leads. Kids who kind of looked like Ava. Girls with wine-colored splotches or cafe au lait stains. But never this. Never a teardrop of that exact color, in that exact place. Her knees felt weak. She sat down abruptly in the break room, magazine clutched in her lap. Her co-worker, Sarah, poked her head in. "Elise, you okay?" Elise didn't look up. Her voice was faint. I think I found her." Sarah's face paled. She sat beside Elise slowly. "Ava." Elise nodded. Her fingers brushed the photo gently. "I know it sounds insane, but this mark, look at it. Look at the shape, the color. It's exactly the same. It's her." Sarah leaned in and stared, the color draining from her own face. "Oh my God." A long pause stretched between them, full of unsaid prayers. "I have to call someone," Elise whispered. "Sam. Detective Callahan. He was the only one who never gave up. He needs to see this." Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do it. Don't wait." Elise nodded, swallowing hard. She pulled her phone from her bag and found the contact, Sam Callahan. Still there. Still saved. She hit call. It went to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. This wasn't something for a recording. She stood slowly, magazine still in her grasp. "I need to go," she said. "Now." "I'll cover your shift," Sarah replied without hesitation. As Elise moved through the library doors and into the brisk autumn air, the magazine pressed tightly to her chest. She realized her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Elise stood outside the Asheville Police Department, the magazine clutched tightly against her chest, rain beginning to mist down from the overcast sky. The building hadn't changed in years, same brick facade, same faded seal above the door, but stepping toward it felt like stepping back into a life she had tried desperately to move beyond. Her hand hovered at the door for a moment before she pushed it open and walked in. The front desk officer barely glanced up until she approached and asked with barely restrained urgency, "Is Detective Sam Callahan in today?" The officer gave her a wary look, then nodded. "He's in the back." "Can I tell him who's asking?" "Elise Monroe. He'll know me." Within minutes, Sam appeared in the doorway to the bullpen, older and more worn than she remembered, but still possessing that sharp, unwavering gaze that once gave her comfort during the worst days of her life. "Elise," he said cautiously, stepping forward. "It's been a while." She didn't waste time on small talk. "I think I found her," she said, handing him the magazine. He frowned, flipping it open with the kind of skepticism a man develops after decades of dead ends and false leads. Then he saw it, the photo. The indigo teardrop birthmark. Sam blinked slowly, then looked up. "That's exactly what you described." Elise nodded tightly. "It's in the report. Page 5. You made a note about it." "I remember," he admitted, voice low. "We thought it might help with identification, but no one took it seriously. It sounded too specific, too unreal." "It wasn't unreal," Elise said. "It was hers." Sam stared at the photo again, then turned and motioned for her to follow him. Inside his office, cluttered with old files and newer digital screens, he pulled open a drawer and extracted a slim manila folder, one that hadn't been touched in years. Elise watched as he laid out the original missing child report. There, in her own handwriting, was the note, birthmark shaped like a teardrop, dark indigo with violet sheen, under right eye. He traced the words slowly, then looked back at the photo. Jesus, he muttered. How did we miss this? Elise folded her arms, her voice brittle. You didn't. You just didn't believe it mattered. Sam didn't argue. Instead, he turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. Let's see if we can trace this image. If it ran in Vogue Americana, they'll have credits. Photographer, location, model name, there should be something. Elise stood silently, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. A part of her still expected this to fall apart, to be another almost. But not this time. The color of that mark, it haunted her. Finally, Sam turned the screen toward her. Here. Photographer listed as Leah Dalton. Location, Appalachia region. Specific site noted as Keller Farm. Model, Aria Wells, age 21. Elise felt her stomach lurch. 21, she echoed. Ava would be 21 now. It fits, Sam agreed. But it's not proof. We need more. Then we get more, she said. I want to go there. Sam looked at her, hesitation written clearly across his face. Elise, it's a remote area. These aren't people who put their lives on Instagram. They might not even know the photos been published. Walking in unannounced could spook them. I'm not waiting, she said. Not again. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. I'll make a few calls. See if we can contact the magazine directly. Maybe get an address. But Elise, he hesitated, the weight of 2 decades behind his next words. If this turns out to be another dead end, then it's another one, she interrupted. But what if it's not? That evening, Elise sat alone in her small kitchen, staring at the magazine now lying flat on the table. The girl's face seemed to glow even in the dim lamplight, that mark beneath her eye like a wound and a beacon. She made a pot of coffee, but forgot to drink it. Her mind was already spiraling forward, Keller Farm, Appalachia, Aria Wells. She had printed the article, highlighted the location, mapped out the approximate area. Sam had called just before sunset, confirming that the photographer had indeed shot the series in early spring. And yes, the model had been listed as non-professional on-site talent. No agency, no portfolio, just a farm girl who happened to be there. Elise sat back, overwhelmed by the tremor of possibility. Her daughter, if it was her, had been found by accident. A single photograph, a chance feature. If Leah Dalton hadn't wandered onto that property, if she hadn't chosen Aria for the cover, Elise couldn't finish the thought. She didn't want to. She spent the night packing. Not much, just essentials. Old photos. Ava's baby bracelet. The hospital card with her footprint. And a copy of the DNA profile she'd kept locked in her drawer for 18 years, in case this day ever came. At dawn, Elise started the drive. The Appalachian foothills rose slowly around her as the roads narrowed and cell reception faltered. Every tree seemed to whisper memories, each shadow a flicker of what might have been. She drove with both hands tight on the wheel, jaw clenched, eyes focused. Fear and hope waged war inside her. When she passed the faded wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Ellensford County," she pulled over and turned off the engine, heart pounding. Somewhere out there, on a plot of land called Keller Farm, lived a girl with indigo under her eye and maybe Ava's blood in her veins. Elise closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Don't run this time. Please, don't let this be another shadow." She restarted the car, the gravel crunching under her tires as she turned back onto the road, heading toward what could be either the end of a cruel joke or the beginning of everything she had dared to hope for. She didn't yet know which, but the trees were getting thicker and the clouds darker, and somewhere ahead, a house was waiting at the edge of the woods. And inside it, perhaps. The gravel beneath Elise's tires crunched louder, as she turned onto the driveway of Keller Farm, a winding path framed by old oaks that arched overhead like guardians of secrets long buried. The morning haze had lifted but left behind a silvery dampness that clung to the air, and as the farmhouse came into view, she slowed her car to a crawl. The house was large, wooden, painted in a faded eggshell color, with ivy crawling up one side and a porch that wrapped around like an idle embrace. A red truck sat parked off to the left near a barn, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed lazily, as if to mark her arrival. Elise parked, cut the engine, and took one steadying breath before stepping out of the car. Her boots crunched softly on the gravel, and she adjusted the scarf around her neck, more out of habit than necessity. She approached the porch, where two figures stood side by side, an older man with weathered skin and a hard jaw, and a woman whose gray-streaked hair was pulled back into a severe bun. They had clearly heard the car. The man narrowed his eyes but said nothing. The woman stepped forward first. "Can we help you, ma'am?" Elise hesitated only a second. "I'm looking for someone," she said, voice even. "I think she may have lived or worked here recently. Her name is Aria Wells." The woman's eyes flickered just for a heartbeat before returning to a neutral expression. "You must be mistaken," the man said. "No one by that name lives here." Elise didn't blink. She reached into her bag and pulled out the folded magazine, holding it out so they could both see the cover. "This photo was taken on your property, wasn't it?" The man glanced at the picture, then at the woman beside him. The silence between them felt loaded. "We had a photographer here a while back," the woman said at last. "She took a few shots for some article. The girl in the picture helped us that day with deliveries. She doesn't live here." Elise looked from one to the other, feeling the tension beneath their practiced calm. "Then where does she live?" she asked. "I need to speak with her." "I'm sorry," the man said firmly. "We wouldn't know. Like Nora said, she was just helping out for a day." Elise stiffened. Nora. The name hit her like a thud in her chest, but it was the voice that did it, low, steady, clipped at the end of every sentence. A rhythm so familiar it made her skin prickle. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying the woman more closely. "Nora Keller?" Elise asked slowly. "Yes," the woman replied, brow lifting slightly. "Do we know each other?" Elise swallowed. The voice had aged, but the cadence hadn't changed. "You used to work at a daycare," she said carefully. "Little Branches in Asheville. 19 years ago." Nora blinked once, twice. "I don't think so," she said. But her tone had changed, slightly too quick, slightly too flat. Elise took a step forward, blood rushing in her ears. "My daughter was there. Her name was Ava Monroe. She disappeared. Your name was on the staff list for that month. Then you disappeared too." Elias shifted his weight, stepping slightly between the two women. "I think that's enough questions," he said. "We're not interested in trouble." Elise kept her eyes on Nora. "You know who she is. The girl in the photo. I saw how you looked at it. That birthmark under her eye. It's not just a coincidence." Nora's expression had frozen into something unreadable, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the porch railing. "You're mistaken," she said again, but there was less conviction in her voice now. Elise wanted to scream, to shake her, but she knew better. "Then let me see your worker logs. The name she signed in with. I'll be out of your hair as soon as I can verify." Elias stepped forward, placing a hand on the railing between them. "That's not something we keep. It was just a casual arrangement. We don't run a business. It was a favor to the Dalton family. You should speak to them." Elise nodded slowly, absorbing every micro-expression, every twitch of discomfort. "Do you know where I can find them?" "I don't," Elias said. "They move around. You might try asking in town." Elise turned to go, the magazine still in her hand. But as she descended the steps, she stopped halfway. "If she's in danger and you're covering for someone, this won't end quietly," she said without turning around. "You don't have to protect anyone anymore." No reply came, only the sound of the wind stirring through the trees and the faint creak of porch boards as someone shifted weight behind her. Back at her car, Elise didn't drive away immediately. She sat behind the wheel, staring into the rearview mirror, watching the farmhouse grow smaller with distance. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Nora's voice had sealed it. She hadn't imagined it. Nora Keller was the same woman who used to read picture books to Ava and the other toddlers at Little Branches. She had disappeared right after the kidnapping. Police never found her. No forwarding address. No resignation. Just gone. Elise's mind began to spin, pulling at the threads. Why was Nora here? Why lie? Why hide? More importantly, was Ava here? Was she close? Elise started the car and pulled out slowly, gravel popping beneath the tires. She didn't know yet what the Kellers were hiding, but she was certain now this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a look-alike model. This was something deeper. She needed to find out where Aria had gone after the photo shoot. If the Kellers wouldn't say, someone else would. The following morning, Elise arrived early at the small-town library in Ellensford County, a quaint red brick building tucked between a diner and an antique shop. The librarian, a woman named Dory with bottle-red hair and thick glasses, greeted her with a polite nod but said little beyond directions. Elise wasn't there for conversation. She walked straight to the children's section, her instincts pulling her to the old wooden bookshelf in the corner, one she had passed the day before when she picked up a local history book. Something about it had stayed in her mind, the broken spine of a hardcover tucked unevenly between titles. She reached for it now, gently sliding the book out. The cover read Fairy Tales of Appalachia, but the binding was loose, and the pages seemed too stiff for a children's book. When Elise opened it, a folded piece of paper fell into her lap. She froze, glancing around the empty aisle, then carefully unfolded the paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a page torn from a journal, yellowed and lined, with faded pencil drawings across the top half. There was a crude sketch of a log cabin surrounded by trees, and beside it, the words Ms. Margot written in a child's uneven scrawl. Below that was a drawing of a smiling woman with wild curly hair and something under her eye, colored in purple-blue ink. A familiar shape. A teardrop. Elise's chest tightened. She flipped the paper over. There were more drawings, stars, a moon, a small swing hanging from a tree, and 3 words scribbled repeatedly in the margins. No crying, no noise, no run. Elise recognized that repetition. It was the kind of language children used when mimicking rules spoken to them over and over. She folded the paper again, this time more carefully, and placed it in her bag. She knew what she had to do next. Margot Pledger, the woman who had walked out of Little Branches Daycare with Ava nearly 2 decades ago, found dead 2 weeks later, ruled a suicide. Case closed. But Elise had never believed it. And now, this drawing, a memory, a warning, a cry, was something tangible. Back at her motel, Elise began digging. Public records, obituaries, social media traces. It didn't take long to find a name, Luke Pledger. Born the year Elise's Ava disappeared. Margot's only child. Now 26 and listed as a manager of a local tavern just 15 minutes from Keller Farm. The place was called Miller's. Elise changed quickly and drove there as the sky dimmed. Miller's Tavern was rustic and warm, with a long bar, mismatched tables, and walls lined with antique farm tools. A soft hum of country music played overhead. Elise walked in, scanning the room until her eyes landed on the bartender, mid-20s, dark hair tied in a small knot, strong jaw, and a restless energy in his movements. She approached the bar. "Club soda, please," she said. He nodded, poured the drink, and slid it toward her. "New around here?" he asked. Elise offered a small smile. "Just passing through." "I'm Luke," he said. She paused. "Elise." They shook hands. Her heart was thudding. "You run this place?" "My dad owns it. I manage most nights." "Your dad?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Is his name Calvin?" Luke blinked, visibly caught off guard. "Yeah." "Why?" Elise took a slow breath. "I knew your mother, Margot." His face shifted. Something pulled tight behind his eyes. "She died when I was a kid," he said. "Everyone says it was suicide." "Do you believe that?" she asked. He hesitated. "I did. Until a few years ago." Elise nodded slowly. "She took my daughter." Silence fell between them, thick as honey. Luke finally said, "You're Ava Monroe's mother?" "Yes." His face paled. "I didn't know. I didn't know who she took. I was 5. My dad told me she was running from something, that she owed people. I never understood." Elise leaned in. "What do you remember about her?" Luke stared down at the bar. "She was scared all the time. She kept saying we had to leave town, but my dad wouldn't let her. Then, one day, she just didn't come home. Next thing I knew, they said she'd hanged herself. But you don't think that's true?" He looked up. "No. I think someone killed her." Elise clenched her fists. "Do you know who?" Luke nodded slowly. "My dad. Or someone working for him. He had people, friends, customers, who owed him or worked off debts in other ways. Some had money. Some had kids." Elise's breath caught. "You're saying he sold children?" Luke didn't look away. "I think so. I think he used my mom to make the exchange. She didn't want to go along with it. That's why she died." Elise's mind reeled. "So who took Ava from her?" "I don't know," he said. "But if she had second thoughts, if she was going to talk, they'd silence her. That's what my father does. Keeps things neat." Elise's voice shook. "Where is he now?" Luke swallowed. "He's got a place not far. A little farm. He doesn't come here often, but he's still in the business, I think. Still moves people around. Still has connections. Do you think Ava, Arya, might be with him?" "If she is," Luke said, "it wouldn't be for long. He doesn't keep things close." Elise felt nausea churn in her stomach. She reached into her bag and took out the drawing. She placed it on the bar between them. "Do you recognize this?" Luke stared at it, his face unreadable. "That's her handwriting," he said. "That's my mom's drawing style. She used to sketch like that. But this," his finger brushed the indigo tear. "She always said it meant something. Said that mark made Ava different. That she wasn't supposed to be part of it. That she was meant for more." Elise's throat tightened. "She tried to protect her, didn't she?" Luke nodded. "She tried. But she wasn't strong enough." Elise folded the drawing and returned it to her bag. "Then I need to be." Elise drove straight from Miller's Tavern to a 24-hour FedEx location in the next town, her fingers shaking as she sealed the magazine clipping with Aria's photo and hair sample, pulled carefully from the page where a strand had snagged during printing, a lucky imperfection most would never notice. She'd seen it the moment she first flipped through the article in the back room of the library, her eyes catching on the faint but real thread of hair trapped between folds, indigo light catching on it like a glimmer of truth. She packaged it with a cotton swab she'd used to collect a cheek sample of her own, and enclosed the DNA test form she'd filled out with meticulous precision. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she drove back to the motel, sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles, and tried to hold herself together. Every hour she checked her email. Nothing. Every few minutes, She reread the letter Luke had helped her compose, addressed anonymously, to accompany the sample to the private lab in Charlotte. He had contacts, he'd said, people who could expedite the process. It would take 3 days, maybe less. Elise lived each of those days in a kind of suspended animation, existing between breaths, between thoughts, between what was and what could be. On the third night, as thunder rolled somewhere far in the hills and the lights flickered in her motel room, her phone pinged. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen. One new email. Subject line, DNA results private. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The words swam for a moment, her vision blurring as her eyes raced through the lines. Then they landed on the number. 99.9%. Truncated, clinical, precise. Probability of maternity. 99.9%. The breath left her lungs in a ragged sound. Her hand clutched her chest, the phone dropping to her lap as she doubled over in a silent gasp. Ava. Her Ava. There was no doubt now. The girl in the photo, with the deep-set eyes and the indigo tear under her right eye, was her daughter. No longer just a possibility, no longer a prayer screamed into the void. A fact. A confirmation. Elise pressed the phone to her chest, rocking slightly where she sat on the motel bed, her whole body shivering not from cold, but from the force of too many emotions converging all at once. She didn't know how long she sat there, but eventually she stood, paced, sat again, then grabbed her car keys and walked out into the humid night. The parking lot was empty, save for her old Honda Civic, which had become a second skin these past few days. She slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and stared out at the highway, silent and dark under a sliver of moon. She reached into her bag and retrieved the printed result, unfolding the paper like it was something sacred. She read the words again, aloud this time, her voice hoarse. Nuclear DNA analysis confirms maternal relationship between subject A, Elise Monroe, and subject B, Aria Wells. Probability of maternity, 99.9%. She clutched the page tightly, then leaned back in her seat, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, their warmth carving tracks across skin that had forgotten how to soften. In the stillness of the car, she imagined Ava as she had last seen her, 3 years old, dark hair in tiny braids, a stuffed rabbit dangling from her hand, one shoe always untied. That image had stayed with her through every holiday, every sleepless night, every time she walked past a playground or saw a child's drawing taped to a classroom wall. But now it fractured. It was still Ava, but also Aria, taller, stronger, eyes wiser than her years, shaped by hands Elise hadn't known. And yet, the mark under her eye had remained, the tear that time hadn't erased. Elise reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old photograph, one she carried for years. It was crumpled and worn, corners curled, but Ava's smile beamed back at her from the past. Elise held it next to the printed image of Aria. The resemblance was undeniable. The slope of the nose, the arch of the brow, the birthmark like a signature God had pressed into her skin. "It's you," Elise whispered. "It's really you." Lightning cracked in the distance, illuminating the empty lot for a split second. Then darkness returned. Elise didn't start the engine. She just sat there, watching the night, her thoughts spiraling not toward what she'd found, but toward what she hadn't. Aria Ava was alive, but she didn't know who Elise was. She had lived a lifetime without her, had been raised by others, taught to speak and think and dream by strangers. And Elise? She had only imagined what Ava would sound like now, only guessed what music she'd love, what fears she'd inherited, what passions bloomed in her heart. Elise folded the paper again, holding it like a child might hold a letter from Santa, believing, hoping, desperate. This changed everything. And it changed nothing. She still had to find Aria. She still had to face the girl whose life had grown in a different soil. She still had to ask for something she didn't know she had the right to ask: recognition, acknowledgement, maybe even forgiveness. Elise started the engine, headlights flaring into the dark. She didn't know where the road would lead next, but she knew one thing for certain: somewhere out there, her daughter walked this earth believing she belonged to someone else. Elise couldn't let that remain true. Elise sat on the edge of the motel bed, the glow from her laptop casting a faint halo over the cluttered nightstand. The document confirming Ava's identity lay open beside her, but her focus was now fixed on something even more delicate: a voice memo she had saved years ago, one she'd recorded on a cassette player and later digitized out of desperation. It was a lullaby, barely 2 minutes long, sung in her own voice, soft and off-key, the kind of melody only a mother could hum instinctively at 2 in the morning while cradling a baby in her arms. She had sung it every night when Ava was small, even before the words formed meaning, when the sound alone could settle the storm of a child's cry. Elise stared at her phone, the contact list open, her thumb hovering above the only lead she had: Area's agency email, forwarded by Sam through the magazine's PR team. It had taken days of careful negotiation, subtle persistence, and a fabricated inquiry about a heritage photo series to secure it. Elise wrote a message, brief and vague. I came across your photos in Vogue. You have a unique birthmark that caught my attention. I wonder if this lullaby sounds familiar. I'd be grateful if you gave it a listen. Attached, she included the audio file and a private email address. Then she hit send and waited. Across the county, Aria Wells sat in the loft bedroom of the Keller farmhouse, her laptop open on the floor, legs crossed beneath her in fraying denim. The window beside her was cracked open, letting in the cool breath of late autumn, and the room smelled faintly of apples and wood smoke. She had returned from helping with a Harvest Festival photo shoot, her cheeks still flushed from the wind, when the message came in. It was strange, unexpected. She nearly ignored it, but the word birthmark caught her eye. She opened the file and pressed play. At first, it was nothing, just a woman's voice, untrained, gentle, humming a slow lullaby. Then the words came, simple, repetitive, the kind a child might hum back years later without knowing where it came from. Aria froze. Her hands, which had been adjusting her headphones, dropped to her lap. Her chest tightened. The melody wrapped around her like a memory not her own, and her body trembled as if her muscles had been holding back recognition for years. Tears filled her eyes without her permission. She didn't know why she was crying. She didn't understand why the song felt like home. But it did. With a choked gasp, she dropped the laptop lid shut, pulled the headphones from her ears, and sank to the hardwood floor. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She curled into herself, hands clutching her knees, rocking slightly. When the tears slowed, she sat up slowly and caught her reflection in the window. The dim light from her bedside lamp cast just enough glow to reveal the birthmark beneath her eye, indigo, curved, unmistakable. Slowly, as if unsure whether it was real, Aria reached up and touched the mark with her fingertips. "Who am I?" she whispered. The words shocked her with their honesty. Downstairs, the Kellers said nothing, but in the silence, a fracture had formed. Elise didn't hear back that night. She didn't expect to. Instead, she pulled out an old storage box she had kept in her trunk for years. It was worn at the edges, the corners taped and retaped, but it held the only artifacts she had left of her daughter's infancy: hospital bracelets, birth certificate copies, the tiny beanie Ava had worn after delivery. At the bottom was a medical discharge file, one she had always overlooked. Tonight, her eyes snagged on a note she hadn't paid attention to before. Twin B stillbirth, 3:07 a.m. No resuscitation attempted. Elise's heart skipped. Ava had been born at 3:02 a.m. She stared at the line again. Twin B? She had known, of course. The delivery had been fast and chaotic. She'd been under medication. They told her one baby didn't make it. But she had never seen the body. No footprint card. No photo. No funeral. At the time, grief had consumed her so fully for Ava's disappearance. She hadn't had space to question the twin. But now something felt wrong. Elise made a call to the hospital listed on the birth records. The clerk who answered gave standard denials. No records could be accessed without authorization. Privacy laws. Forms. Elise didn't care. She drove there the next morning, file in hand, and requested to speak with the oldest administrator on shift. She waited hours before someone relented. A retired nurse, passing through for training, agreed to review the file with her. The woman, named Lorraine, wore tired eyes, but carried a memory like steel. She read the name, paused, looked at Elise. You had twins. They said one died. Lorraine stared at the discharge. This code, she said, pointing at a margin note Elise hadn't understood. This was used back in the early 2000s for babies placed under direct transfer, before legal adoption sometimes. It was unofficial, off books. Elise's stomach turned. Placed where? Usually private clinics. Sometimes other channels. Especially if the parents were young, poor, or if someone offered cash. Elise swallowed hard. Are you saying my second baby was sold? Lorraine didn't answer. She just closed the file slowly. Elise left the hospital with her head pounding and her vision swimming. Outside, the sun burned too bright. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Twin B. Another daughter. Another mark. Another tear, real or imagined, that had been ripped from her life without warning. She thought of Aria's face again, the curve of her cheekbone, the line of her jaw, and wondered, was she the only one? Aria sat in the dim light of the Keller farmhouse kitchen, her elbows resting on the old oak table where she had eaten every meal for as long as she could remember. Nora and Elias sat across from her, hands folded awkwardly, their faces pale, as if they had aged overnight. The silence between them wasn't new. It had existed in small doses her entire life, in the way they avoided questions about her early years, in the carefully crafted vagueness around her adoption story. But tonight, the silence was louder, edged with a truth that had been too long buried. Aria broke it. You knew. Her voice was flat. Not a question. A statement. Nora looked at Elias, then back at her. We didn't know at first. But you found out. Nora nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. You were 5. A man came to us, said he had a child who needed a home, said her mother couldn't care for her. We didn't ask questions. Aria clenched her fists in her lap. Did you pay him? Elias shifted uncomfortably. We made a donation. That's what he called it. To help with medical expenses, he said. But later, Aria pressed, when my picture appeared in a missing child alert. When people asked questions. When you saw that birthmark, what then? Nora's voice cracked. We were scared. We thought maybe it was a mistake, that someone would come for you, take you away. We told ourselves we were protecting you. Aria's voice rose. You lied to me my whole life. Elias spoke gently. We raised you. We loved you. That wasn't a lie. But who I am was, she shot back. And you let me believe it because it was easier. Nora wiped at her cheek, tears falling silently. We wanted to do the right thing. We just weren't brave enough to undo the wrong. Aria stood, the chair scraping back sharply. You don't get to rewrite this as love. You kept me from a truth. Upstairs, her suitcase sat half-packed, but her mind was already gone. She needed space. She needed clarity. She needed answers. Meanwhile, Sam Callahan was seated at his desk back in Asheville, a wall of printouts and old reports spread across the corkboard behind him. He had followed the payment trail from Keller Farm through several dummy accounts and shell corporations, each one older and dustier than the last. But the name that kept resurfacing subtly, buried in the signatures and contact references, was Calvin Pledger. Sam remembered the man from old case notes, a shadowy figure who ran a small chain of pawn shops and family enterprises that always skirted the edges of legality. Calvin had never been charged, but he had always been a person of interest, especially in cases that involved quick, undocumented adoptions, often through cash transfers and informal channels. Sam leaned forward, reading through the report Luke had quietly handed him. It was a financial statement from the tavern, but one line item stuck out. Farm labor donation $6,000 recipient, Kestrel Trust. Kestrel Trust was one of Calvin's many fronts. Sam highlighted the line and began cross-referencing dates. One transaction coincided exactly with the day Aria had appeared in her first kindergarten record, under the name Aria Wells. It all fit. Elise had been right. Aria hadn't been lost. She had been moved like property. Sam picked up his phone and called Elise. She answered on the first ring. "It's him," he said. "Calvin Pledger. He set the adoption in motion. The Kellers paid him even if they didn't know the full story. He's been laundering this kind of deal for decades." Elise's voice was tight. "So how do we find him?" "He has a property 2 counties over. Remote. He doesn't use phones, but his trucks run shipments through a feed company. I've flagged the most recent invoice. He's due to receive a delivery tomorrow morning." "I want to be there," she said. Sam hesitated. "Elise, no. I have to." Sam didn't argue. Across town, Aria sat on the edge of a hotel bed, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. The night pressed against the windows, silent and unforgiving. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from the same anonymous sender who'd sent the lullaby. This time, it included a photo. Her as a baby being held by a woman she didn't recognize, but somehow, instinctively, did. The woman's eyes looked like hers. The tilt of her smile. The way her hand cupped the baby's head, tender, familiar. Below the photo, only 2 words, "My daughter." Aria covered her mouth, breath catching in her throat. Then, without thinking, she replied, "Where are you?" The dirt road leading to Calvin Pledger's off-grid farm twisted like a snake through the dense forest, disappearing beneath a canopy of overgrown pines that let little light through. Elise sat in the passenger seat of Sam's unmarked car, her hands clenched tightly around the folded DNA report she refused to leave behind. Luke rode silently in the back, his jaw set, his eyes dark with something more complex than anger, something that flickered between dread and defiance. No one spoke as the vehicle crunched slowly over gravel and dead leaves. When they finally pulled into the clearing, the farmhouse came into view, a structure hunched low like it was hiding, flanked by 2 rusting barns and a crooked windmill that squealed as it turned lazily in the wind. An old pickup truck was parked beside a shed, its hood up like a frozen yawn. Sam cut the engine. "He's here," Luke said, voice tight. "That's his truck. He doesn't let anyone else touch it." Elise nodded, her shoulder pressed against the door, as if bracing for impact. "Let's not give him time to hide," Sam muttered, stepping out first and motioning for them to follow. They approached the farmhouse together, boots crunching over gravel, hearts drumming in synchrony. Sam knocked, loud and deliberate. No answer. Luke reached for the door handle, then hesitated. "He booby-trap stuff sometimes. For animals, he says." Sam nodded, drew his weapon, and carefully eased the door open. The interior smelled of tobacco, dust, and something faintly metallic. Elise stepped in after them, scanning the room with sharpened focus. The furniture was sparse: an old couch, a stove, a wooden table covered in papers and mail. But it was the far wall that drew her forward. A corkboard, partially covered by a faded curtain, held dozens of Polaroids, receipts, and scribbled notes. Elise moved closer. Her eyes locked onto a photograph, torn, jagged along the top edge. It showed two small girls sitting on a blanket, their faces partially obscured by sun glare. One half of the photo was missing, but the remaining portion revealed the lower half of a child's face. Her right cheek was marked by a familiar symbol, an indigo teardrop shimmering faintly even under age-stained plastic. Elise's breath hitched. It wasn't Aria. It couldn't be. Aria's birthmark curved left. This one curved right, mirrored. Elise staggered back a step. There were two, she whispered. There really were two. Luke leaned over her shoulder, his expression tightening. I've never seen that photo, he said. He must have hidden it. Sam reached for it just as the back door creaked open and a voice growled. I'd put that down if I were you. Calvin Pledger stepped into the room, a shotgun raised. His face twisted into a mask of fury and regret. You brought them here, Luke? He spat, eyes flicking from his son to Sam to Elise. You think this makes you better than me? Luke stepped forward slowly, hands raised. This ends now, Dad. You've done enough. Calvin's hand didn't waver. I gave you everything. A roof, a name. I taught you how to survive. You taught me how to lie, Luke said. How to trade lives like cattle. Elise's voice was steady. Where's the other girl? Calvin's eyes narrowed. What girl? The twin, she said, holding up the photograph. Where did she go? You're wasting your time, he said, stepping further into the room. That photo don't mean nothing. Sam edged left, putting himself slightly between Calvin and Elise. Drop the weapon, Calvin. It's over. Calvin smirked. You have no idea what you've stepped into. There's more than me in this. There's people in suits, names you wouldn't dare whisper. You think this ends with me. I think it ends here, Sam said. Calvin's finger twitched. The shotgun rose. Elise moved instinctively to the side. Too fast, too vulnerable. A crack split the air. The gun fired. Pain exploded in her shoulder as she dropped to the ground, blood soaking through her sleeve. Sam ducked and returned fire, but Calvin had already shifted. The room turned into a blur of motion. Elise heard shouting, her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. Another shot rang out, closer. Then Luke's voice, shouting something unintelligible. When Elise lifted her head, she saw Calvin standing over her, gun raised again, jaw tight. But just before he pulled the trigger, Luke lunged forward, shoving him sideways. The second shot went wide. Luke took the brunt of the blow, tumbling onto the floor beside Elise. Sam tackled Calvin from behind, wrestling the shotgun from his hands with a grunt. It hit the ground with a clatter as Calvin let out a strangled curse, pinned beneath Sam's weight. Luke groaned, holding his ribs. Elise crawled to him, her shoulder blazing with pain. You're hit, she said. You jumped in front of me. Couldn't let him finish what he started, Luke rasped, his face contorted in pain. I owed you that. Across the room, Calvin stopped struggling. Sam pulled cuffs from his belt and secured the old man's wrists, breathing heavily. Elise looked at Calvin, really looked at him, for the first time. His eyes weren't wild anymore. They were hollow, dark pits of something long decayed. Shame flickered briefly in the way he glanced at Luke, who lay bleeding beside the woman his father had once helped destroy. Sam radioed for backup, barking coordinates. Elise pressed her hand to her shoulder, blood trickling through her fingers. But all she could think about was the torn photograph still pinned to the board and the other half of the face it once held. The arrest of Calvin Pledger sent ripples through law enforcement channels across multiple states, and within 48 hours, federal agents descended on several properties tied to the shell trusts and dummy companies Sam had helped trace. What they uncovered confirmed everything Elise had feared and more: ledger books with names, coded entries, outdated passport photos, payment slips tied to obscure adoption donations, and most damning of all, a locked file cabinet filled with hundreds of physical documents identifying children listed as placed, moved, or inactive. Inside that archive were over 40 distinct profiles, many with attached DNA reports, some marked no match, others with scribbled initials indicating aliases. Sam, overwhelmed but focused, sorted through the pile while Elise, still healing from the gunshot to her shoulder, sat beside him in the recovery ward, her arm in a sling and her mind elsewhere. She stared at a folder labeled LW 2004 and felt her stomach drop. Luke had returned from a brief hospital stay, bruised and stitched but alive, and now hovered quietly in the corner, flipping through an outdated binder full of photo IDs. Sam opened the LW file and read the name aloud. Lyra Weston, female. Date of birth, May 17, 2004. Transferred at 2 days old. Elise's mouth went dry. May 17th, she repeated. That's Ava's birthday. Sam glanced at the attached birth certificate. Delivered at St. Elora Medical Center. Same hospital where you gave birth. Elise's heart began to pound. That can't be coincidence. Sam shook his head. No. But there's more. Look at this. He turned the document to show a faded infant photo, time-stamped and watermarked with hospital codes. The image was grainy, but clear enough to see the indigo-tinted teardrop just beneath the right eye. Elise gasped. The shape, the location, the hue, it mirrored Ava's birthmark, only this one curved in the opposite direction. That's her, she whispered. That's the twin. Sam nodded. She's 21 now. Listed under guardianship of a woman named Valerie Weston. Lives in New Hampshire. No official adoption paperwork. Just a guardianship order from an old circuit judge who retired in 2007. Elise leaned forward. Do you have contact information? There's an email and a phone number. Can we call her? Sam hesitated. You should. But prepare yourself. She may not know anything, or she might not want to talk. Elise nodded, took a deep breath, and lifted her phone. She dialed the number, her fingers trembling. After 3 rings, a soft voice answered. Hello. Hi, is this Lyra? Yes, who's this? Elise's throat tightened. My name is Elise Monroe. Hi. I think we might be connected in a way you don't know yet. I promise I'm not trying to scare you. Could we video chat for a few minutes? I just need to see your face. Please. A pause. Then cautiously. Okay, I guess. Elise sent a link. A minute later, the video connected. The screen flickered, then stabilized. There, sitting in a softly lit room with pale lavender walls and a shelf of books behind her, was a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair and guarded eyes. She looked into the screen, expression wary. Elise couldn't breathe. The shape of her face, the faint arch of her brows, the dimple in her chin. Hi, Lyra said, unsure. Elise smiled, tears already forming. Hi. You said we're connected? Elise nodded, then gently reached toward her phone speaker and played the same lullaby she had sent Aria. The melody floated into the room, gentle, maternal, haunting. Lyra blinked slowly, her lips parting. Then her hand, almost unconsciously, lifted to touch the skin beneath her right eye. A single teardrop shimmered under the overhead light, catching just enough for Elise to see it clearly. Lyra whispered, I know this song. Elise's breath hitched. You do? I don't know how. I've never heard it. But when I was little, I used to hum it. My foster mom said it was something I made up. You didn't, Elise said gently. It's a lullaby I used to sing to my daughter. You were her twin. Lyra's eyes widened, her pupils dilating. What? You were taken. Just after birth. They told me you died. But they lied. They sold you. Lyra stared at the screen, her face pale. She looked down, then back up. This mark, she said, touching the indigo tear beneath her eye. They always said it was just a birthmark. A weird one. Elise smiled softly, though tears streaked her cheeks. It's not weird. It's your sister's too. That's how I found her. Lyra was silent for a long moment, breathing shallow. Then she whispered, So I'm not who I thought I was. Elise shook her head. You're so much more. The sky was still pale when Elise arrived at the little cabin nestled at the foot of the hills, a quiet rental that Arya had chosen weeks earlier to be alone and think. The frost still clung to the grass, turning the blades silver, and her boots left dark imprints in the earth as she stepped across the yard, each footstep marking the distance between 18 years of absence and the fragile hope of reunion. She didn't knock right away. She stood on the wooden porch for a moment, listening to the quiet inside, the faint creak of floorboards that told her someone was moving. When she finally raised her hand and knocked, the door opened slowly. Arya stood there in a hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled into a loose knot, face pale but awake, like someone who hadn't slept but couldn't afford to close her eyes anymore. Elise didn't speak. She didn't try to explain or apologize or offer answers that would only muddy the clarity of this moment. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out the tiny object she had carried across cities, years, and grief. It was a simple bracelet no bigger than a teacup's rim, woven from faded, colorful rubber bands, its elasticity long gone, its colors dulled by time. It was the kind of thing children made in the back seat during long car rides or rainy afternoons with boxes of craft supplies, their tiny fingers fumbling and twisting with endless imagination. Elise had found it tucked inside a small music box in the keepsake box she kept under her bed. It had been Ava's, a handmade bracelet, the first thing she ever gave her mother without being prompted. She had been 2.5, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, beaming as she held it up with sticky hands and whispered, For you, Mama. Elise held it out now, without a word, her hand trembling, palm open. Arya's eyes dropped to the bracelet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her lips parted, barely audible breath catching in her throat. She stared at the object as if it were glowing, as if it reached beyond memory and into some instinct buried deeper than words. Slowly, like her hand belonged to someone else, Arya reached out and took the bracelet. Her fingers closed around it, her grip tightening. She began to shake. Her knees bent slightly, and she lowered herself to sit on the step behind her, holding the bracelet between her hands like something sacred. Elise remained standing, watching quietly, her heart pounding as if it might shatter her ribs. I remember this, Arya whispered, her voice cracking, eyes filling. I don't know why. I do. Elise sank to her knees in front of her, not caring about the cold seeping into her jeans. Arya's gaze rose slowly, her chin trembling, tears slipping down her cheeks. I remember giving this to someone to you. Elise didn't move. She let her nod be the only answer. Arya raised her hand, the one still holding the bracelet, and placed it softly against Elise's cheek. Her palm was warm despite the chill, and Elise closed her eyes at the touch, swallowing the sob that clawed its way to her throat. You were small, Elise said softly, and proud. You said, I made this so you can wear it forever. I did. Until the day they took you. Arya's shoulders trembled. Her breath hitched. I thought it was just a dream. That bracelet. that kitchen. Elise smiled through tears. It was real. And then, without hesitation, Aria leaned forward, her arms wrapping around Elise's shoulders, pulling her in as the bracelet pressed between them. Elise wrapped her good arm around her daughter, no longer a toddler, no longer just a memory, but flesh and blood, and here. Aria buried her face in Elise's shoulder, and the birthmark, the indigo teardrop, pressed gently against her mother's skin. Elise felt its warmth. She felt its truth. No more DNA tests were needed. No more photographs, no more files or investigations. This was enough. Elise held her tighter. "You're not the 3-year-old girl I lost," she whispered, voice steady despite the tremble. "But I'm still your mother. And I'm still here." Aria let out a sob, pure and unfiltered, and Elise rocked her slowly, like she had done so many nights in that quiet house 2 decades ago. The sky above them turned gold as morning finally broke across the hills, and the frost began to melt, drop by drop. In that embrace, the weight of 18 lost years didn't vanish, but it softened. In that moment, they both understood something neither court nor science could articulate, that love, when anchored deep enough, endures even when memory does not. And as Aria whispered, "Mama," like it was a question she had finally answered, Elise closed her eyes and let the tears fall. Because some stories don't end with closure. They begin again, with contact, with courage, and with the quiet strength of simply being found. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more emotional mystery journeys like this one. What part of the story struck you the most? And where in the world are you watching from? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.